Sure. Okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, my name is Brad Reed. I'm the Executive Director of Sail Newport, and I'd like to welcome you to our 8th Challenger Lecture Series event that's presented by Hinckley Yachts and Hinckley Yacht Services. This is our 6th virtual Challenger Series event, and we're delighted to have a prestigious panel for our discussion on increasing diversity in sailing as we honor Black History Month. Special thanks to Emily Grigori, our events manager, for getting this together tonight and getting our technology worked out, which is always a challenge. Reminder to our guests that we can't get to all questions, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. The chat room is open for comments, but please keep it smooth sailing in there and put the questions in the Q&A function. Okay, as always, I want to acknowledge Dr. Charlie Shoemaker for being the inspiration for this evening lecture series. Charlie's been a great mentor to so many sailors in this community, and it was fitting to name this series in his honor. We can't wait to have you all back in the 11th hour racing great room at Sail Newport, but for now, these Zoom conference rooms will still have to suffice. A big thanks to our sponsor, Hinckley Yachts and Hinckley Yacht Services. From sales of new and used boats to world-class service facilities around the country, Hinckley Yachts and Yacht Services has you covered. Learn more about Hinckley's product line and yacht services offerings at hinkleyyachts.com. And Emily, if you could put in the link to Hinckley Yachts in the chat, that would be great. People can check that out. We have a lot of things going on here at Sail Newport, and it's not too late for you to register your son, your daughter, your nephew and your niece, your grandkids for youth sailing programs. We have 2-week summer programs, 1-week programs, and of course, our Little Guppies program for the 5- and 6-year-olds, which is the cutest thing on the planet. So please go to our website, hit that QR code, and register for your summer sailing programs at Sail Newport. And also, please consider making a gift to Sail Newport's annual appeal. By doing so, you provide essential, unrestricted program and operational support, including allocations to financial aid, building and technology updates, boat maintenance, and procurement. Please contact Director of Development, Eve Formisano, and she can walk you through 3 easy ways to give to Sail Newport's annual fund. Online with your credit card, through Give Campus or Sail Newport, a mobile pay option by scanning this QR code right here on this page, or of course by check payable to Sail Newport. Again, please contact Eve with any questions, and thank you for making a donation to support community sailing. Also, become part of our membership. We have $25 military memberships, senior memberships, $100 full memberships, and then also business memberships at a variety of different categories. You get great member benefits. Again, we got a QR code for you, and Emily will put all these links in the chat so you know where we're coming from. We have 2 more lecture series coming up. Believe it or not, March 3rd, yes, next week, we'll again talk to some friends from Auckland, New Zealand, and some family with a preview of the America's Cup match. Join Kenny and I and Shirley and hopefully Nathan to talk about the match between Emirates Team New Zealand and Luna Rossa Prada Pirelli. Also, in late March, we continue our diversity discussion with a focus on gender diversity in sailing. This panel will be moderated by Danny Washington, who was the moderator and MC for the Ocean Summits this year for 11th hour. So stay tuned for those announcements. Be on the lookout for important spring and summer schedule announcements, summer boat storage contracts, regatta announcements, and membership renewals. And on to our presentation. So before I introduce our panel, I just wanted to say, as a leader in community sailing, Sail Newport has a responsibility to promote greater diversity and inclusion within the sport of sailing through increasing pathways to recreational and competitive sailing to people from all backgrounds. It's our hope that tonight's important discussion will lead to a greater understanding of the issues, so those who are in position of making decisions for recreational and competitive sailing programs will embrace and seek out the diversity of its sailors, as well as inspire people of color to get involved in sailing at every level. So, as I stop sharing here, I wanted to introduce our panel. Let me briefly introduce everyone, and then we're going to get into everyone's story. So first of all, welcome to our panel, Ayme Sinclair, the Vice President of the National Women's Sailing Association. Amy's been sailing for the past 5 years competitively all over the world, including the eastern coast of Africa. There, she formed the first women's sailing team to compete in a race held in Lamu, Kenya. Is that pronounced right?
Lamu, yeah.
Lamu. And she's currently sailing on the east coast of the US J109 One Design Circuit. Welcome to Ayme.
Hello, everyone.
Right. The Honorable Representative Marvin Abney. Rep. Abney is a longtime supporter of Sail Newport. He serves as the chairman of the House Finance Committee for the state of Rhode Island and was instrumental in helping to secure funding for the successful 2015 and 2018 Volvo Ocean Race stopovers in Newport. Marvin, great to have you. All right, Sarah Douglas. Sarah is joining us from Key Biscayne, Florida, where she was recently nominated to represent Canada in the 2021 Summer Olympics in Tokyo in the laser radial. Sarah is the reigning Pan American Games gold medalist in the radial. And Sarah, thanks so much for taking the time out of training to join us. I talked to one of your coaches today. I think you're supposed to be in the gym in an hour. Mark Clarke. Mark Clarke. Mark is the deputy chair of Sail GP Bermuda, the Grand Prix event coming to Bermuda with the Sail GP. And he is the chair of the steering committee on, he's the chair of the steering committee on, give me that one, Mark, because I didn't write it down right.
Okay, so I'm the deputy chair of the steering committee answerable to the BTA, as well as the LGP in community deliverables as far as advancing our strong, diverse maritime history of Black sailing and contributions to Bermuda, as well as community involvement and bridge building.
Thank you very much. That's great. I appreciate it. And Heather Strout. Heather has served as the executive director of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center here in Newport, Rhode Island since 2018. Heather is an educator of 23 years, and Heather was born and raised right here in Newport, a graduate of Rogers High School. Heather, thank you so much for joining. Yep. All right, so if everyone can just take their mics off mute. Great, perfect. Ayme, I want to start with you. You've got a lot going on with the National Women's Sailing Association, your adventure sail program, and so much more. But first, when did you start sailing? And did sailing find you, or did you find sailing?
I think, and first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the fact that you're doing this. I think it's such an important topic. But to get back to your question, sailing found me. I was lucky enough to have a friend who had been sailing through, this new boyfriend she had. And she invited me to come out with them. And it was really fun. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. And then they said that they were going to go down and do a trip in the BVIs where they would sail the boat themselves and asked me to come. And I was like, well, yeah, but I guess I got to know what I'm doing, right? So then I went and I flew all the way to Chicago to take a ASA 101 class because that's where my friend had moved to at that point. And after I passed and came back to New York, I was just kind of like, all right, well, what do I do now? I don't know anybody who sails. I'm kind of on my own here because they moved. And so after maybe about a week or two, my coworker had been listening to my conversations. You're hustling. But he was like, listen, I'm a member of a yacht club and we have a race night. Why don't you come down to the club for race night? And I was like, race night? Like, I don't know what I'm doing. There's no way I can race. And he was like, no, come, we'll show you everything you need to know. And that was the night that I met the team, and I've been racing competitively with them ever since. And it
So
was
it was an invitation. An invitation got you out on the water.
yeah.
Simple as that. That's
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. So Rep Abney, thank you so much for joining our conversation on diversity in the sport of sailing. You've got 2 grandchildren in our youth program. Are we going to make forever sailors out of those 2?
I think so. They really love what they're doing. I can't believe it. You know, they ask me, they say, Grandpa, well, you like to go out in boats, but you know, I go out in motorboats, something that I can control, you know. But they said, you know, I really would like to learn how to sail. And you know, I grew up in Texas, so we didn't have an ocean unless you lived down on the Gulf of Mexico. But I did grow up around lakes and things where water was something that always interested me as a kid. So I always ask my kids and my grandkids to stretch themselves. And if they find an interest in something that's not normal for where they live or the kids around them, to try it anyway. And so they did. We took them out on some J-22s and Rhodes 19s at the Navy base here. And they enjoyed it. And so I thought, well, heck, let me put them in a class or two. And we were a little reticent at first, but they went down. They had a great time this past summer, and they can't wait to get back into the boats again. And they were 9 and 7 then, so I think they're 10 and 8 now. They're a little stronger, but just to go down and see all of those kids from an area of Newport, and this is the prettiest place in the world to sail. I'm sorry, but it is. But you have a lot of kids who live in parts of my district that never get to the beaches, never get to the water, you know, and that struck me. And so I brought them down, they learned, and I saw a lot of those kids, what they did, not just learning how to sail, but the coordination that they did when they were over. They would help each other get their boats out of the water. Those are lifelong things that I think are important, not just to sailing. So they can't wait. They're ready to go. And we tried to get them into the later summer classes because we thought the water would be too cold at first. But they said, Grandpa, it's wet. That's all we need is wet water. So it doesn't matter when.
By that time, they've been inside on Zoom calls for the last 3 months. So they're ready for anything outside too. So
they are.
Hey, we're going to get back to you for a couple questions, Marvin. We know you don't have a lot of time, but I want to introduce Sarah here. Sarah, you're one of the best laser radial sailors in the world. You won gold at the 2019 Pan Am Games in Peru, and you're nominated to represent Canada in the Tokyo Games. How did your journey start and that led you to the success that you've had?
Well, I guess it all started with my brother. He was the one that found sailing and then brought it to the rest of the family. So I grew up in Barbados with the ocean, all around. And it started out as a father-son thing because my parents have no sailing knowledge, no sailing background. And so when we found the sport, it was like, okay, well, let's learn as a family. And it became a whole massive family activity. All of our travels related to sailing about me and my brother competing. We got it really into competitive sailing from early on. And everything just changed from the sport of sailing for us. And my brother and I both have kind of taken the high performance competitive route. He went to 2 Olympics for sailing, and I'm going to be going to my first. And we've really pushed ourselves as athletes and sailors every day. And it's really changed our whole lives and my families. And sailing's awesome.
That's great. Well, I appreciate the sailing's awesome part because I think all of us on this panel think that sailing's pretty awesome. Mark Clarke, wow, you've had lots of roles in sailing, part of the Bermuda Sloop Foundation, the Bermuda Sailing Association, an avid sailor representing Bermuda at national and international events in the Comet class, and now part of the steering committee for community outreach with Sail GP and the event in Bermuda in the spring. And you're a former cop and detective for Bermudian Police Force. Yes. So welcome, Mark, and tell us a little bit about your path in sailing.
Okay, so unlike similar to Sarah, but for me, my father was almost on the who's, well, actually, he was on the who's list of sailing. And in Bermuda, as well as regional vice president, the first regional vice president for the comedy class, which is an American dinghy, International One Design. Now, with him, he used to have a mark on the side of the door, so when I was tall enough, I can get in the boat with him. And it for me, it was just always wanted to be up underneath of him and seeing him. And so when I was big enough, it was every Sunday, every Tuesday. And contrary to what the Democratic rep, we actually have the best place in the world for sailing. Absolutely, it's hands down. But having said all of that, my dad did so many firsts in Bermuda. He was the first Black member of the Spanish Point Boat Club. He was one of the founding organizers of International Race Week. He was one of the introducers of the tornado class, which actually ends up being the America's Cup of that ended up in Bermuda. It was the grandchild or the grandfather of that. He introduced the 505s. He pushed diversity. And we all did that, not coming from middle class, upper class background. He built his first comet in the backyard of my grandfather's workshop. He was a carpenter by trade. And that's how the comic class actually ended up in Bermuda. We have 3 clubs that are working class clubs. And you can go on the websites as East End Mini Yacht Club, West End Sailboat Club, and Mid-Atlantic Boat Club. And they all come from working classes, 8 boat clubs in Bermuda. But 3 of them are working class. And all of them were formed during the segregated Bermuda, during a dark period. But it didn't stop anybody from sailing. It didn't stop anybody from, communicating. And so these great relationships were formed. And as you rightly said, I am part of the Bermuda Sloop Foundation, which does everything to give back and to promote our maritime history. With the sailing Bermuda, everything is about Bermuda. And we have some great programs. If I'm talking too much, let me know. But feeder programs for everybody that starts from the middle schools, from the primary schools to middle schools to after school programs to graduate programs. And then we have sponsorship. So we actually have the Bermuda Sloop Foundation. We have the Endeavor program. We actually have the Bermuda Maritime Academy, which is in its infancy stage, that all promotes maritime sailing and racing. As I said, we have 8 clubs, and we're trying to move them back to being competitive amongst themselves. And we're trying to achieve this with the SailGP Grand Prix that comes in April. And they've been fantastic in actually working with the community and as far as our deliverables and getting into them. They start arriving next month in full force. As soon as the America's Cup is finished in New Zealand, all of the skippers will be coming to Bermuda with, I think, the exception of the embarker, who was here for the America's Cup 2017. But the competition resumes. Everybody's welcome to come.
That's great. Well, thank you, Mark. That's a great background, and we're going to get into some of those questions that we have about the pathway that you just developed. And I want to bring into the conversation right now and introduce Heather Hole Strout, who is the executive director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center here in Newport. And Heather, we've worked together for almost 12 years on programming with the MLK Center. And one of the things that we think we haven't done quite right yet is we haven't built that bridge from this outstanding program that we've done with you to kind of keep some forever sailors going.
Yeah, so I agree with you on that, Brad. And I think so many steps are being taken in the right direction to improve that. I'm proud to say that I've lived in this community for 50 years. And I myself actually grew up right down the road from Sail Newport, and I'm not a sailor. In fact, last summer, I was lucky enough to be able to go out with the kids on one of their sailing lessons. And I felt probably the same way that they did the first time that they went out, excited, nervous, and feeling like I had a lot to learn. So I did grow up in this community, and sailing has always been something I've looked up to. It is an exciting sport, but a sport that was hard for a lot of people to reach. So I think breaking down the barriers and making it easier for the children of our community is something I know Sail Newport is committed to. The kids at the MLK Center each summer, there's about 50 children who participate in those weekly sailing lessons, and we need to figure out a way to grow that and make it even better, and to keep these kids sailing, not having it stop when they leave in 5th grade, having them never go out on a boat again. So
right.
It's a big commitment.
It is. And, I'm going to bring it back to Ayme here for a second. Heather just mentioned it's hard to reach. There's perceptions about sailing, that it's an elitist sport, that it's unattainable to get on the water. What are some of those things that you've seen that have either, enhanced that image, which is not a great image, or broken that down?
So, for me, I think that, when I think about what my experience is like when I go and visit different clubs, it gets a little difficult for those of us who are just jumping into the sport for the first time, or have been invited, or are maybe going to a yacht club and don't really know anyone. I think the perception of sailing as elitist is maybe something that's an outside perspective, but once you do get in, there are some other things that are a little bit prohibitive to making that space warm and welcoming. And some of it, I think, is rooted around unconscious bias. I can tell you, I visited probably 30 or 40 different clubs up across the United States. And almost every single time when I'm at a club, someone usually either is asking me if I can help them with something, especially if it's like a meet and it's, a lot of people there because they think I work there, or they have an air about what am I doing here and why am I in this space. And it's it makes me, it makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think if the goal is to invite other communities out, we have to sort of be conscious of the fact that just because you're seeing someone who doesn't look like what you're used to seeing there, you try to be welcoming, because I love the sport. So of course I'm going to keep coming back. But for a young kid, if you make them feel uncomfortable, they're not going to come back.
Sarah, in your experience in Canada and even Barbados, did you have the same experience?
I think Barbados is pretty diverse, but when it comes to Canada, at yacht clubs in the sport of sailing, we lack a lot of diversity, especially in like visible minorities. And so often when I go to a yacht club, I'll be the only person of color. And it's like, I don't really always think about it. And I've never really had any major experiences. I've never had kind of like what Amy's had, but it is like, okay, I'm the only person of color here. And and then if there's another person, I'll often be mistaken. Like when I was a kid, there were 2 girls that were a little bit different in ages. They were both of color, and we would constantly get mistaken for the other. And that's just like one of like, oh, like the only Black girl that's sailing. And I think often we'll get singled out as that only person of color when it shouldn't be. And in Canada, and I think at a lot of yacht clubs, it is tough to have only like a handful, and it is made clear that there's only a handful of
and that's the problem, right? And that's the issue, is how do we increase and how do we reach out to the communities and to communities of color to say this is available. And not everyone's going to take to sailing, just like I'm a terrible golfer. I kind of don't even like playing golf, but I've gone out and played a couple times. It just wasn't for me. We know that it's not going to be for everyone, but what do we do? Where are some of those opportunities and obstacles to increase the number of folks of color in the sport?
Well, I think just recently, especially with this year, a lot of yacht clubs and organizations are looking within and just being welcoming, not only just within the community or like at the yacht club, but thinking about what you represent, like visually or virtually. So for an example, like a website. Someone's interested in going to a yacht club. They've never been there before. Okay, let me look at this yacht club, look it up. And then it's like, wow, it's a lot of like white people or this certain culture. And like, I don't fit it. I don't see myself being part of that. And so that's something I think is pretty easy to do, that you can just kind of change that to ensure that you kind of have that visual representation and be more welcoming in that front when someone's looking up where they're going to go, whether that's yacht club, golf club, whatever it is. That's an easy kind of target that you can do just online.
Yeah. And if I can add to that, I would say when you're thinking about your outreach, it's so paramount if you try to staff your team in some way with someone, or maybe just have a coordinator or a volunteer that you can try to engage who represents the communities you're trying to reach out to, because that pathway gets a little easier. There's certain nuances that they'll understand, especially if you're trying to engage kids. So one of the programs that the National Women's Sailing Association has that's been quite successful over the last 30 years is called Adventure Sail. And that's a program where we invite young girls of color to come out on the water for the day, and it happens all across the country. And so it's difficult when you first start to try to launch a program like this, because first you have to find, a partner. Like, where can you find girls who will come in? And so one group wound up having to go to a church to do their outreach. And that was a process. It took a couple of months. Like, they came to the church so that the pastor and the church family could get used to them. Then they invited the pastor to the club so that they could see that this is a safe thing. They wound up coordinating with the Girl Scouts Club, who was sort of based out of that church, to get the girls. And then once you solve the transportation issue to get them there, then you got to think about, like, okay, well, some of them will bring their parents. What are their parents going to do? Is your club inviting? Are they going to be just sitting there while their kids are off on the boat? Like, and what sort of activities or welcoming things can you do to make them feel comfortable? Because if the parents aren't signed on to this, then that's half the battle. But the wonderful part about, I think, the Adventure Sail program is that we've now teamed up with U.S. Sailing, and on August 14th, 2021, we're going to have a National Adventure Sail Day. And so all of U.S. Sailing's connected clubs are sort of invited to participate, and any other club or community center that wants to participate can, by going to womensailing.org to kind of sign up and find out about it. And that's an easy entry point for you to come into this, because we have a whole kit on how to do this. We also will do a couple of training sessions with you to kind of help you think about how to dive into that community outreach piece, because that's key to this being successful if you're not already doing something like that.
Perfect. Marvin, back to you on this. Kind of segues into you have the luxury of knowing and being involved in Sail Newport, and by the nature of your role as our local state rep. Many parents and grandparents do not. How do you think we as Sail Newport, and we're going to bring it back on ourselves because we want to do things better, right? How can we more effectively connect with families of color on the island to make our summer program more accessible to them?
Yeah, that's a tough one, but it's not impossible to get over. I think what we need to do is, first of all, continue what we're doing, and that is in the summertime, have kids, and I think we have several organizations that helps with that, but have small kids. When you're little, or when you're small or young, all of those words, that's when you're trying to decide, who am I? What is my body all about? What can I do? What can I do to have fun? What can I do to be different? But if you're not around people who can show you different things, it's kind of hard. And it's hard for parents to go, well, I'm not sending my kid off to a lake or to an ocean or something like that. But what we have done with other programs here is there needs to be an advocate that is connected to the community that can actually explain to folks how this works. And we've, in fact, at the church I attend, we have a choir school, and these kids not only learn to sing, but they learn to play instruments, but it's fun doing it. And they've gotten, you know, several small grants from places to buy pianos to do things of that sort. You know, once you see a child's eye light up from, wow, this is something I've never seen before, but I can do it now, then they tell their friends, they tell their parents, and it just seems to snowball and work. And I know from my perspective, I try as best I can to use some of the state funds that we have but for doing that, some of these kids will have nothing to do in the summer. But it is amazing how sometimes a small amount of money can entice others to give more because they see that it works. The worst thing you can have is a small child that doesn't understand the ocean. We live surrounded by the ocean, or they don't understand teamwork. They don't understand, well, I can learn something different than I've ever done and be good at it. When I grew up, you know, back in the 60s and you know, early 70s, you know, a Black male, all we could do was play basketball, football, and baseball. I mean, all of my heroes were people like that. And I wanted to play tennis. I wanted to learn how to swim. I became the first water safety instructor in my whole city, all those sorts of things. I learned how to ski. I've run 4 marathons in my life. You know, that happened because as a child, I was connected to people who showed me that I could just, you know, no matter what my color was, excel. That's where we need to go with this stuff, but you will need at least 1 or 2 advocates.
Correct. And this leads to, Heather, something that you and I have talked about in the past, and Neil Smith actually threw out in the chat, is we need diversity across all areas of our sport to make it more diverse. And that includes sailing instructors, it includes people on boards of directors, and we'll work on that. But how can we talk about the importance of having someone in the, you know, a sailing instructor for a little kid to say, hey, that person looks like me and they're doing this, they're sailing, I love this, this is great. Talk about the importance of that you've seen at the MLK Center.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important. And I do think, you know, the program ends with the kids in 5th grade, and then there's not another opportunity for a lot of these kids until they get to high school, and then they can join the sailing team. Well, that's a lot of years in between 5th grade and high school.
The Pell School on one end and the Rogers High School sailing team on the other.
Right. So I think, you know, we need to find some ways to bridge that gap in between those years. And one of the ways that we could do, and I know Brad and I talked about this, and Brad is really committed to this, is trying to maybe make junior counselors out of some of the participants of the younger programs, make them junior counselors and really try to lift them up and engage them to really be mentors to the younger children in the coming summers. And that could really start a positive movement in this way.
Can I just add, Brad, I don't mean to jump in, but can I just add on to this, because I feel like there's another path outside of just engaging kids, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll get there too, but go ahead.
Yeah, but when we get to the I'll circle back, but I also think that there's probably other experiences that are unique, I think, to young girls versus young boys. And so when you're thinking about getting instructors involved in this, I know it's hard enough to just find somebody of color, but if you have young girls, it could be very intimidating for a young girl to be in a situation where the counselor or the instructor is a male. And I think women sometimes, or young girls, might not be as vocal about wanting help and sticking their hand up. So that's also another consideration if you have young girls who are in your program, to try to figure out if you can also add young women of color or just women in general into your instructor program and staff.
If I can weigh in, I mean, CNN just today ran an article where I want to say in England, they've completely banned boards that does not have diversity. That's going to be a thing of the past. And so I heard the comment, I think it was by Margaret, about diversity in sailing as far as across the sailing instructors, just across everything. It's about the evening races. it does take an executive sponsor. It does take the ability to show that it's not as expensive. It does take, people that's on top to actually bring those and fund those that are down bottom, because it's easy to get kids excited, and it's easy to get people, as long as you can show and create the pathway. And this is one of the things that I encourage everybody to look up: the Endeavor sailing program Bermuda, as well as the Bermuda Sloop, as well as a lot of the clubs, is that if you have somebody from the young person, for Bermuda, it's football, cricket, and swimming and tennis, but sailing is just as important. And we have young people in our class that was actually graduates of the Endeavor program that are winning with their skippers. And that's male and female. But it is about people's having the ability to reach back and say, we're not going to be doing the same thing and expecting a different result. It's got to be, open the doors to everybody and let it go, because that's the way to change the world. It is. We can't be in these silos of color. Bermuda is not in that silo of color, and we do have unconscious bias, but we face it more so when we travel outside of Bermuda than when it's actually inside of Bermuda.
Right. Now, Mark, you've done something a little different than that I think is very important to mention. You have the Endeavor program, which is basically a community sailing program to introduce the sport, introduce water safety, introduce sailing to a variety of different folks in your community. But you've also then linked it with what you call the Inspire program. Can you talk about that link and the pathway and the bridge?
So the Inspire program has actually been introduced by SailGP, and they've made it the fourth tranche to the Endeavor 3 stages. And basically it goes into the careers side of things. It also goes into the racing part of it, and it shows the pathways. Now that actually also technically now starts to link with the Bermuda Sloop Foundation, which cares on people as far as teenagers and going into the teenage years and higher. And it can actually, again, go towards career paths.
Career paths in the marine trades?
In the marine trades. We have graduates of the Sloop Foundation that are now marine pilots in Bermuda. We actually have them on boats, private yachts, as being officers. We actually have them as engineers. They've gone on to the marine academies overseas, and they're having the careers. Actually, some of them are first mates, and I want to say at least 2 of them are actually captains of yachts overseas. And this is almost unheard of, that in an island that's 58,000 people, have 8 sailing clubs, 1 fishing club. You have 3 charities that specifically deal with water activities, and pushing kids and developing kids to make decisions. I mean, sailing is the ultimate decision maker. Sarah's she has to make those decisions, and she earns the decision that she makes, as opposed to, it's the nice thing about sailing, not everybody gets a trophy. Everybody participates. And sailing does that for you. Right? It's years ago when I started off in my career, I was saying, well, there's no scholarships out there. There's no historical Black colleges that actually have sailing programs. And now Hampton actually has one. They've had one for almost 20, maybe 30 plus years that compete with the Ivy Leagues. And that's huge. There's life after football. There's life after basketball. My father, when his last race was 78 years of age, and he died the following year. But, if you're still alive, you've probably got been fighting him now to get back in the boat. Sailing is a career, it's a life history. Long when you finish your international competition, hopefully, Sarah, that you'll be racing in club racing, and you'll be teaching and giving back and inspiring others behind you. My father lived that life. Many of the skippers that is in the comic class today were his juniors that he was taking overseas. He was picking them up from their house. The parents would allow him to get them and take them down to the clubs and teach them how to sail and have them in the boats and keep on pushing. And it just requires that one person that wants to change a kid's life, and it actually turns into a moment. If I'm passionate, if I come across as being passionate, because I am, I've seen it. I've seen the people that have been success stories that would have been otherwise a life of maybe crime or at-risk lifestyle, where just one person who says, hey, I love you, and you're coming sailing. Nope, you're not staying in bed. Get up out of your bed. Wherever you are, I'm coming to get you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Mark. I mean, it's really important to hear that.
Yeah.
So, you know, Ayme, you mentioned it's not just kids, and I want to move on to adults in sailing and getting more adults sailing. We have a tendency to preach to our own choir when it comes to sailing. There's other ways we can reach out to communities of color for folks to try this sport. And you and I, we had a little conversation a couple days ago about that. And I'd like you to kind of touch on some of those opportunities that you see to getting adults involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times when we think about reaching out to communities of color, we go straight to like, okay, we have to raise funds to support this. There is one barrier that I think that is notable to mention, and that is if you are trying to talk to groups that normally don't come out on the water and you don't have boats available, that's where you do have a challenge. But if you have boats available, you know, there's other pathways. Like, you know, I'm just going to quote Karen Harris, who was on the U.S. Sailing DEI panel not too long ago, and she was saying, like, listen, you know, I am general counsel for all the lawyers here in Chicago, and I represent all the hospitals here. And I went to Harvard. I did, you know, people of color make money. We can afford a yacht club membership. We can afford fees to pay if we want to join a community sailing center to have access to boats. So there's this, I think, a perception that there is only one socioeconomic status for people of color, and that's false. And so the other challenge is to figure out, well, how do we reach the groups who can afford this? And so there's a lot of affinity groups out there through work groups that are specific to people of color. So Salesforce has something called Bold Force. That's all their employees who are Black. So if you are near a headquarter of a big company, this is a good way for you to reach out to the company itself and see, okay, what's your affinity program? How can we do some sort of team building exercises with your affinity program? Boom, you know, that's qualified. They're working people. The other way is there's tons and tons of different lawyer associations that are specific to African Americans. There's the Black Women's African American Law Lawyers Association, and that's regional. There's probably the group that's biggest and that probably will have a chapter in almost every major city is going to be the sororities and fraternities that are specific to Black communities. And so I guarantee you, if you reach out to one of those groups and say, hey, when are you doing your next meeting? Would you like to do it at our club? All we ask is for maybe 3 minutes ahead of your meeting to just talk to your members. I guarantee you they're going to be like, yes, who doesn't want to be at a yacht club to do one of their events or their meetings? That's a wonderful way. And then you start developing that relationship, right? And I also think that some of this is really on, you as the person who might not have friends or people in your circle who are people of color. There are tons of ways for you to sort of expand your circle and jump into other groups so that you can meet people who don't necessarily look like you. And then when you do that, invite them to come on your boat. Because someone mentioned, and I think in the chat saying well, it seems like most of you got into this because someone invited you. And that is one of the biggest pathways. So expand your friend circle and then invite them out.
Great. Now, community sailing centers do have a huge role in this because we do have the equipment. And Marvin, you have seen that, and with the Pell program and offering the every fourth grader in Newport the ability to go sailing for a significant amount of time during their school day. That's a fantastic program. Sarah, what do you see in Canada? You're a member of ABYC, Ashbridges Bay Yacht Club, right? And they're kind of a mix between a community sailing center and a yacht club. There's a lot of community effort in that yacht club. What do you see there?
Well, for us, we offer a lot of adult sailing as well for the adults. And I thought Ayme's idea was fantastic about going to those different groups of people, and to just kind of build on that. I think when you have those groups at your yacht club sailing, you could also be like, well, how about we're opening up our adult learn to sail every Tuesday to non-members, and you can try out sailing and just kind of have a tryout as well, just to expand that one day or weekend at the club. I think that's a great idea, and a great way to reach out and kind of retain members or potential sailors as well, instead of just a day experience. And so in Canada, I think we have a lot of potential to do the same and to expand and diversify our sailors, because a lot of yacht clubs do have quite a lot of resources and boats to share, and there's no reason why they can't expand that to other groups.
And I'll also add this other thing, it's always easier to go and reach out to a group that's already sort of like in the recreational space. And so there's one group that I absolutely love. It's called Outdoor Afro, and their whole mantra is, opening up the outdoors to Black people across the United States. And if you go to their website, you'll see they have a chapter in almost every single major city. And so some of the outdoor activities they do are kayaking, where there's, water nearby. And so they're already kind of like doing it, right? So it's not a hard jump for you to reach out to them and say, hey, listen, we want to know if you guys want to like do something at one of our clubs or one of our community sailing centers with your group. And 100% they'll be open to that. But I think it's important for me also to mention that needs to be reciprocal, the relationship, right? 100%. So you probably should go and check out one of their events, maybe go to a couple of them, engage, build relationship, and then, make the invite.
Perfect. Marvin, you going back to the Pell program and going back from the adult side of things back to the kids for a second, you've seen it in action. What do you think the legacy of every child in the Newport public school system being introduced to sailing over the next 20 years? What do you think we can see 15 years down the road?
Yeah, I think that's the real value of any sport, and not just sailing, but introducing children to physical activity, making it fun, but introducing them to that at an early age. Because there's a component that we haven't talked about. Look, these kids don't own boats. They're not very wealthy. But if you own a boat, if you have means, that attitude has to change too, in the sense that I see these kids down, at Sail Newport. Let's take 2 or 3 out on my boat. Something that's very different. If you don't do that, all we're doing is talking in circles. As a politician, I deal with that. You have to get real at some point in time. Yeah, there's a lot of issues that we have to deal with in our community and neighborhoods. But if you're looking at a little kid of color and going, that person will never make a good sailor, that person won't do this and do that. If that's your attitude, then it's real difficult. And that's what I have to deal with daily in everything we do. But the program is so good at Sail Newport, and people are so into helping. It's a combination of public-private stuff. The young ladies that I'm looking at now who are world-class sailors, they didn't become that overnight. Someone put them in a position where they had to learn, they had to train, they had to understand navigation. But that probably came from them being on a boat at one time. So I think part of what makes it so good here is that we have, of course, thousands of boats in the harbor. And I would challenge anybody who brings a boat into the harbor here to just think about taking a couple of kids out, Now, the other problem we have is that in our communities of color, and we have several people working on that here, is that people are afraid of the water because they just don't go in it. We're trying to make sure that as many people as we can teach how to swim, just basic stuff. So we have to have the help from those of us who are fortunate enough to have boats and things like that to make small steps. You're not going to go into a community today and 50 kids come out saying, I want to sail. But, if you take 1 or 2, 3 or 4, or if people who are here would come down to Sail Newport to see these kids come in from a sailing class, to see them having fun jumping in the water, or to see them having fun helping each other take their boats out of the water. That's the stuff that character is made out of, So I think if we do more things like that and be honest about ourselves, then we'll be fine. I don't have a problem getting on a big boat in the summertime in Newport, But,
I'm going to get you on a little boat.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, make sure it's a Rhodes 19 or J20, something like that.
Okay.
But you've actually, I love, I'm not a great sailor, but I'm a landlocked Texan, but I love it. I love it. The first time I got on the water at the Navy base and realized that, I am not in control of this thing. I got to learn stuff. I then had a perspective of people who sail in a big way.
That were crazy?
Yeah. I mean, and we had to learn to rig our own. You guys have good sails. We had to rig everything, but it just teaches so much individual skills and and we have almost a brand new building where you can come back and talk about ecology in the sea. And that's where I am. That's what produces citizens. So I'm just saying that for those of you who can afford to, take a couple of kids out and, show them what it's like to be on the water, and you can talk about this. That's what makes a difference, because then, the reality is that there's not a lot of water except, big lakes and the East and the West Coast, but we have thousands of kids who are locked into this perspective that all I can do is be what I saw somebody else do. And sometimes that's not so good, but one adult can take one kid out and show them a different way in life, and everybody learns something. So if that part of it is not there, right, we can talk the other parts all day long, and you're going to have onesies and twosies.
Yeah, and Heather, that's part of the bridge we were talking about. That is a section of the bridge. And again, Ayme, we're going back towards the kid program for a second, the young sailor part of it. What do you think of that?
Well, I agree. I mean, in Newport, so if you look at where Sail Newport is located in Newport, to get from the north end of Newport to Sail Newport is very far away. And so I think in the north end development that's coming up, we need to really look at more access to the water and being able to bring some of these boats to northern Newport to give more access to other people to the water. So I think that's really important. And I agree with you, Marvin, on the swimming also, because that was one thing when I went with the kids sailing last summer. It was a really hot day and they were jumping off the docks, and there were a few kids among the 12 kids I was with that were terrified to go in the water. So if you are afraid of the water, I would think sailing is not going to be something you'll excel in. So we first need to teach these kids how to swim, which is something at the MLK Center we're committing to making happen this summer. So
great. And the Pell School has a second grade swimming program, which leads into the fourth grade sailing program. Mark, I'd like to bring you in on this part of the conversation.
So I heard the rep Marvin make a comment about the schools, and it took me back to when I was in high school when Moses was the teacher. But what every woodworking class in the schools done as part of their curriculum was build a boat, a sailboat, which they then raced.
Yeah.
And whilst doing that, you're teaching skills. The participants are teaching skills as far as carpentry, building, and then it's the sailing part of it. So I'm pretty sure many of these schools have a wood shop program, would have a workshop program. So it's one way of getting them interested in. I have another cousin who was a math teacher, and he actually used sailing, the dynamics of sailing, to teach geometry, algebra, and to make teaching a lot more exciting, which converted it into people having that first interest. It does shape character. The water, sailing, maritime activity shapes character. And I keep on saying it because a lot of the things I realized that we took advantage of in Bermuda, or took for granted, the access we had. And we didn't have access because we had money. We had access because the adults in the room wanted better for us. And you're right. You're absolutely right. Without adults pushing the issue, and making, not accepting the excuse, well, I don't have the money, just keep on pushing the issue. We will create sailors out of people who don't even know how to swim. I mean, I actually have an ex-boss who sails weekly. He doesn't know how to swim, but you can't keep him off the boat. So you can't keep him off the boat. And but yeah, so it is Bermuda. It is the Bermuda dynamic. It is the Bermuda dynamic, and we have fishermen who don't know how to swim, but are fishermen. It is the Bermuda dynamic, and it's a dynamic of probably any island nation. That the water's there, you shouldn't be afraid of it. You should learn how to use it. And I think it's great programs, but it also starts from having the conversation and then building upon it.
Yep, and there's plenty of groups around the United States that are doing those kind of maritime trades. Hudson River Community Boating, which is Rock the Boat. Herreshoff Museum has a high school boat building program. There's a lot that are out there. I think there needs to be a region-wide concerted effort to get those opportunities out to everybody. Sure. I do have a question from the Q&A, and this is from Chris Musler of, believe it or not, the New York Times. This is so wonderful and eye-opening. Thank you. Can outreach sometimes be offensive, considering you're inviting a group based on being from a community of color? Do you have recommendations for clubs, associations, committees to help them answer that question of why they want to invite this group, and then how to appropriately ask and invite a community initially as an advocate into their sailing community? Sarah, going to you first.
I'll let Ayme take that.
I don't want to, Sarah, please feel free, because,
Go ahead, Ayme.
All right. So I think it's really about how you frame this. Right. And also, again, if you do the work to recruit staff that looks like the communities you're not going to get that. Right. But if you don't have that yet, right, I don't want that to stop you. You need to just own up to the issue. Just say, listen, we recognize that we all look one way and we want to change that. We love sailing. Talk about all the benefits of it, right? Teamwork, character building, all these things, and just say, and we want to share that, and let us know if that's something you'd be interested in. And just be honest about why you're doing what you're doing. And I think it will be appreciated, right? And if you're uncomfortable, you can always reach out to someone from from maybe one of our groups that we have, right? The other thing I didn't mention is that I'm also the CEO of the Women Who Sail, which is a huge Facebook group that represents around 50,000 women sailors around the world. And we have a specific group called Women Who Sail, Women of Color. Now, in that group, there's 250 women from all over the world, right? And if you send me a message and say, hey, I'm trying to do this thing, I don't feel comfortable, I don't know how to phrase this, I will help connect you to someone who might be local to your area, or just give you some language to make you feel comfortable to do the reach out.
Before I go, I agree with you. But again, in my business, sometimes when you're dealing with an issue that nobody owns up to, you've got to start medium, or you got to start small initially. I hate to say that because I like to go big. But if you go big, then you got a lot of people uncomfortable. But I guarantee you, if you start with small, with one or two people, and you get a chance to understand that because the person doesn't look like me, they're not going to sink your boat. They're not going to mess it up. They're not going to mess up your club. They won't. Trust me, you then begin to realize that, oh, well, if one person can adjust, maybe two or three can. Before you know it, you will be doing so. I don't know that there's a name for that, but I do know that when you get ready to do something big like this, you've got to overcome those personal and interpersonal fears that many of us have. I still have some interpersonal fears myself, but I think if you own up to it, you can then deal with it. But I got to get back downstairs, Brad, and close out a committee meeting that's going on before these people. My phone's been buzzing. But I love this. I appreciate the time that we've had to spend, and hopefully this will help this program go all the way.
Now, before you go, Marvin.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for calling you by your first name, but I can't remember your speed.
Oh, that's okay.
To give you an example, if you want to go big, you actually have Morgan Freeman, the actor. He
that's true.
Sail down to Bermuda every summer in the 80s. Every summer, he used to watch us race. He used to be down Penner's Wharf. He stayed on his boat. He befriended many Bermudians in the St. George's area. He actually even came to Mini Yacht Club, East End Mini Yacht Club, which we were members. And you can start off with that. I mean, not plug in Bermuda, but you can also do some highlights of how we've done it here. And if, like you said, if people see that people of color, they actually have 3 clubs. We have actually combined 10 international internationals in our 40 years of racing, and we've dominated. People like Rudy Bailey and Stevie Dickinson have dominated the Comet class at the international level for quite some time. So if you give examples and see kids, because everybody sees a basketball player, baseball player, football player, tennis player, but they don't really see Black sailors. You have Sarah Douglas. You actually have a lot of talent in Bermuda. You have Ayme, but someone like Morgan Freeman leading that charge to say it is okay to sail. Don't be afraid. I mean, it's big. It gives a whole new world for them to explore and to also get involved in.
I think you're right. I think he's a blue water sailor, as he calls himself.
Yes, he does.
He has multiple ocean crossings, and the thing is that that's huge. Everybody knows him as being an actor, but they don't know that he's actually a solo sailor, and he's good. And so you just celebrate your successes. I mean, for instance, Bermuda's one of our things. We actually, Howard Lee, he was the first Black Olympian sailor, and he's Bermudian. And Sarah actually knows his grandson, Raquel Evans, who is also very good and dominating. So we actually have these real beautiful histories, but we don't celebrate them. I'm sorry, or we're not allowed to because of the big elephant in the room. People make the mistake of they perceive perception versus reality.
Well, we got to eat that elephant one bite at a time. We'll get there.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Yes, indeed.
Kind of like the Rhode Island state budget. Go get them. Go get them.
Anybody got an extra $10 billion? Okay. Thanks so much, guys. I got to run, though.
Okay, we're going to stay with everybody else. Thank you, Marvin. We'll talk to you soon.
Sure.
And then I'll just say one more thing to Chris. Sorry, Chris. There is an extremely rich maritime history for people of color. And there are books that you can probably look up that will help you see that this is not an uncommon sport for us. And we've been on the water a very long time. So it's not like it's a savior thing. It's just something that's a part of our history. We just don't know it. That's all.
You're right. You're absolutely correct. I mean, I can tell you, I could speak all night about Bermuda's maritime history and strong Black maritime history. And the thing is that there are many countries that actually have a similar history, but how often does the rest of the world know about it? Right. It's just amazing.
Well, there's still a few questions out in the chat. My favorite one I'm going to ask to Sarah and Ayme right here. Who were your female or male role models in sailing? Who are your role models in sailing? Starting with Sarah. You can't dodge this one.
Well, for me, it was always my brother. He started it, and I just kind of followed in his footsteps. And then, I don't know, like classic sibling rivalry, you always try to beat your brother. So
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I'm sure no one knows about anything about that, but that's probably a big role model for me, and he still contributes, and like I always go to him for advice. And then I look up to a number of different athletes outside of sailing. Mm-hmm. One of them, I think Serena Williams is just incredible, just the longevity of her career as well. And another Canadian athlete is just Rosie McLennan. And I don't know, there's a number of different athletes, and I draw inspiration every day online via social media as well.
Yeah. So Sarah doesn't know this, but now she will. Sarah was one of mine. I was like, yeah. I was like, I follow her on Instagram, and I just was like, oh my God, it's always nice to see another woman of color who's a sailor, especially one who's excelling. It's a wonderful thing. For me, another one was Marie Rogers, and she was the first Commodore of the Los Angeles Yacht Club, and it's first Black female Commodore, I should say, and it's like 118-year history, and was the second Black member of the club, right? So just a lot of hurdles she jumped to get to Commodore, and then she built out a community sailing center for them, and brought and diversified that club. So for me, she's a hero for me. And then the other big one is Tracy Edwards. I mean, what she did with that all-female sailing team when she did the Whitford Around the World race, man, like I just, and to see how she's so focused on gender equality, and also sailing around the world, especially to places where there are a lot of women of color, and getting them out on boats. I love her. So she's one of my role models.
Mark, you're next.
It's my father. It's he had this way of walking into a room or to any club anywhere in the world that he went, and whilst he was a man of color, no one challenged him on that. And then for me, I'm gonna probably get myself in trouble locally, but a man that I looked up to from the first time we met was a person and ceremony named Stevie Dickinson. He we're not much farther apart in age, but he was the first person that I knew won an international race. And he was a child. He won the first he was the first Bermudian to win an Optimus international race in Switzerland. And then when we started racing internationally in the Comets, he was the first Bermudian to win a race. And him and his crew, Besley Tucker, which was their cousins, they won so much. And then you had Rudy Bailey, who was his nemesis, and they would compete. Then you had Howard Lee, who was first, he was the first Bermudian Olympian Black sailor. But I had so many local heroes that I didn't always get a chance to tell them how much I value. But you appreciate them for all the things that they've done in spite of. Our clubs were formed, two of them were formed on the war years. And probably we sailed for the oldest Black trophy, named after a Black man in the world. I did get to meet my hero, which was Paul Alverstrom. I remember watching his black and white films of him racing in the snipe class in I think it was the 50s, or maybe late. I think it was the 50s when he won in the Olympics at the age of 16 with water bottles because he was too light, and it was it's just amazing that people like that. But my heroes were all local because we just didn't know what we didn't know. But my heroes were definitely local because of the trailblazing nature of their accomplishments. Well,
this has been a great conversation, and the chat is asking more questions than we really have time for. Heather, we have to go to you though. Who is your sports role model, your role model?
Well, actually, my sports role model was my father. He was a local athlete here in Newport, and he was the athletic director at Rogers High School for many years. And he really taught me that you don't have to be great at something. I've never really been an athletic person, but I watched him really lift up a lot of kids in our community who thought they couldn't do something. And when he passed away several years ago, I received many, many messages from people who told stories of how he made them feel special, and they excelled in their sport because of that. So he's definitely my number one sports role model. But I would also say Serena Williams. She's a remarkable person that I look up to, and time and time again, she just amazes me. So for sure.
Same here. Serena's awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I want to expand on as well is just the importance of role models and people of color for role models, because kind of like what Ayme was building on as well was just that we don't always have that like visual, like, oh, that person has reached that milestone and I can do it too, because we don't quite have that. Like for me, I never had a Black sailor that I looked up to that was a female because there simply were none. And I guess I'm kind of like breaking the barrier in that way, but that's why I always went to Serena, or like outside of sports, and even Serena or Tiger Woods, like they started out in a different landscape and now it's really grown to be more diverse, and they've kind of broken through the community and led the way. And I think that still has to be done in sailing.
Sarah, you are on point in this project. You are a barrier breaker, and I'm so impressed. And I've just getting to know you over the last few days. I'm very impressed, and I can't wait to see you at the Olympics. I hope that nomination comes through.
Thank you. Thanks. But I mean, it also can expand to leadership within organizations, clubs, high performance directors. I don't know, like in terms of female leadership and people of color.
I think it's also important for you, if you're going to go into this path of trying to diversify your staff, if you are at the top and you are in charge, develop some mandates, right? Like, we need to have this, right? This is part of our, it's going to take a little while to get there. And then for those of you who might be saying, well, how do we like recruit staff that's people of color? There's a bunch of different maritime high schools. I think there's one in New York City. All of the students there, most of them are of color. You should reach out to the teachers and say, listen, we're looking to recruit graduates who might be interested in relocating, because you guys are in Newport, but there might be another maritime high school that might be nearby you. And there's all these other groups. I think Christadora is a big outdoor environmental organization that recruits their students in to be team members and employees of that group. You can recruit from there. So there are options.
Yeah, I know that you're right, is that diversity and inclusion is important. And there's no excuse that to say, well, they're not good enough. That no longer applies. That should not stand in any environment. It's just wrong. I could use some stronger words, but let's keep it simple. This is the 21st century, and any organization that is not diverse and inclusive should not be an organization that should have community support. It's plain and simple. Whether it be ethnic, whether it be sex, it shouldn't support. It should not stand.
It's not just diversity in programs. It's diversity in leadership. And it's role model situation for all these young people coming through our programs.
Right. So in Bermuda, we have the international business, which is a mainstay of our economy. And one of our leaders, our CEOs, is Patrick Tannick, a Black man. And he champions on a regular basis DEI. It's no longer an excuse. In actual fact, it has always been an excuse, but it's no longer an excuse. You have persons of color graduating from Harvard University every year. They're being accepted every year. So there's no reason why they should not be included in everything. And that's the same thing that goes for sailing. I will say to you, for every person that is a sailor of let's use white person who's a sailor, there's one who can actually be of color that can actually also be there, but for the opportunity. If they can thrive in any other sport, they can definitely thrive in sailing. And it's the same thing as far as Commodores, as far as the whole from the top down. There's no reason why it should not be occurring. It's none whatsoever.
Well, thank you, everyone. Ayme, Heather and I will be working with you and our program director to make August 14th a very memorable day here at Sail Newport. We're looking forward to the adventure sail. I've already talked to our program director. I think between Heather and you and I and Kim Hapgood, we're going to have something special here for that. You've all given so much of us, just so much to think about. The chat is very, very positive. They want to bring these initiatives back to their clubs. There's been a lot of talk about diversity over the years. I think the last summer through the fall and into this winter has, it's made a lot of us think about, we're just not doing it right. So thank you for engaging in this conversation. Thank you to Ayme, Marvin, Sarah, Mark, and Heather for joining us tonight. And sailing organizations need to understand and embrace the importance of diversity, create those environments which support a range of participants, volunteers, coaches, mentors, and we will find new ways of reaching out to our local communities. Diverse knowledge and experience will help bring new perspectives and insight into our audiences. Sail Newport pledges to be an ongoing part of this effort. Let us grow sailing together and go sailing together. Yeah. So thank you so much for everyone. Thank you for everyone who's donated or is willing to donate to our wonderful little nonprofit. Stand by for